Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the invitation to this rather special event. I will start by asking the question, do we have an economic policy strategy for growth in this country? And if I look at what the government is talking about or doing, I would say that I find the code words kiky and sote. And we all know these are hugely important issues, but I don't think they qualify as an economic policy strategy. I'm not sure we have one. Do we need one? Well, we haven't had any growth in this country for 10 years by now, so it's at least worthwhile posing the question. And in fact, what I make the observation, which I found intriguing, that in the past, we always had a clearly articulated economic policy strategy for growth, which was rather widely embraced also in this country. At least in retrospect, things look like that. So I will give you a 5-minute course in Finnish thinking about economic growth in the past, before then coming back to the question, if we would want to have an economic policy strategy today, what might be some key words with that regard? I start by the first decades of Finnish independence. That brings us to the period between World War I and World War II. Finland, like other European countries at that time, clearly embraced classical liberalism, meaning that great importance was attached to price stability, preferably through being part of the gold standard, but also sound public finances with budget balance, which was indeed tightly imposed by cutting expenditure in case of need. And then more broadly, non-interventionism into the private sphere of economic life. There was one person above all who was very eloquent representative of this line of thinking, one of the outstanding personalities in Finnish history, Risto Ryti, who was first finance minister, then a long-standing governor of the central bank before becoming prime minister and president during the war, as all of you know. And he gave very clear expression to the doctrine of classical liberalism, even though he was also a very pragmatic person, as he demonstrated in many instances. After the Second World War, many countries turned to Keynesianism, not only the Anglo-Saxon countries, but also our Nordic neighbors. Not so in Finland. We turned to something which I think could be called state capitalism, in which all policies were focused upon achieving a high rate of capital accumulation, high rate of saving and investment, partly through forced saving through the government budget in the form of budget surpluses. And also, regulation of financial markets, monetary policy, exchange rate policy, budget policy, tax policy, everything was designed in a way to achieve a high rate of investment. There was one personality again who more clearly than anybody else articulated that view, which was nonetheless than Urho Kaleva Kekkonen in a booklet, a pamphlet that he published in 1952, Onko maallamme malttia vaurastua? That strategy was hugely successful in the sense that the rate of investment in Finland was extremely high for a few decades. On the other hand, that policy was also associated with allocational inefficiencies and directly waste to some extent. So there was a lot of criticism. The third line of thinking in Finland emerged gradually in the 60s and then in the 70s, inspired partly by Pekka Kuusi, who was a specialist on social policy. And then the idea was, we need an educated labor force, we need a better school, so we created what we called a peruskoulu, and we need universities, academic institutions, and universities were built all over the country, a little bit too many, some people would argue today. But anyway, we chose the line of investment in human capital, and that strategy as well was hugely successful, and clearly is one reason why Finland has become a wealthy nation after all during the past decades or so. But then we came into the big depression in the 1990s, and it was realized that yes, investment in human capital is important, but it can bring you only a certain distance. And the thinking was, what do we do now? Where the source of inspiration come from, I'm not quite sure, but Prime Minister Esko Aho certainly strongly endorsed the line that what we really need is to invest in research and development in order to foster, engineer innovations which were then thought of as technological innovations above all. And in fact, we stuck to that line of thought for quite a few years until the present crisis, more or less. And we did see a huge transformation of the Finnish economy towards high-tech in exports and production. So in many ways, this line of thought seemed to be extremely pertinent and successful again. But And indeed, during that big depression, I should mention that the government led by Prime Minister Esko Aho increased strongly financing for the technology agency Tekes, while almost everything else was cut to bare bones. So that line was indeed implemented in practice. But that brings me then to the present situation, where, as I said earlier, I don't really think that we have an economic policy strategy today, at least not one of the same clarity as before. And what could conceivably be the code words or what we should focus upon in a world which is global, competitive, and complex, and where customer orientation is very important, and where you need also sensitivity for cultural diversity in this global economy. I'm not sure, and I think many of you would have better thoughts on this. I would look for the word, and the word I would give first, I'm not satisfied with. That is yrittäjyys in Finnish. But yrittäjyys is a bad word in a way. It means running a business, but I don't think it gives the right connotation. In Swedish, yrittäjyys is företagande. That's indeed running a business. But there is another word which I think is more promising, which is entrepreneurship. In English, of course, entrepreneurship. At least as used in Swedish, it has the connotation that what you're doing is not just running a business, but you're combining various aspects or functions, be it design, technology, marketing, logistics, building up a brand, perhaps organizational novelties. You do that in a creative way in order to construct a business concept which is viable and profitable. And there are many examples of it in this country and our neighboring countries. I'm thinking of companies which have grown really big, like, say, IKEA, Hennes & Mauritz, Lego, you name it, where I see no sophisticated technology, but I do see a creative combination of various aspects which has then turned out to be hugely fruitful. Of course, you need more. You need the right sort of spirit. You need the inspiration, the enthusiasm, the belief that the good or service that you are producing is such as to make the world a better place to live. And you need, indeed, courage. I think Annu was talking about that here earlier, that you need to have the courage to set your ambitions high. And then the question is, if you believe that is true, that entrepreneurship would be a kind of a useful way of encapsulating the kind of thinking that we would need in this world, what do you do to foster it? How do you enhance it? And that is a difficult question. It's much more difficult than to invest in physical capital, human capital, or research and development. It is indeed, and again I refer to what Annu said, what we need is a cultural shift of some sort, and that cannot be created by decrees. It's up to you, in a way, up to us, everybody, in our various capacities. But I do think there are also things that the government can do. I think the government can do some things in the area of regulation, which often needs to be adapted more quickly than is presently the case. The government could be looking at various aspects of taxation. Are they really fostering the things that we do want them to foster? We can talk about financial issues, we can talk about competition policy, and there are many other aspects. But these are not something that I am here to talk to you about. And indeed, I'm happy to note that rather soon after me, there will be a representative for the government who will be talking, presumably, at least to some extent, along those lines. So I think it just remains for me, after this 5-minute survey of economic policy strategy thinking in our past, to hope that indeed we would, rather sooner than later, have a shared vision of the kind of direction in which we should be going in order to re-engineer dynamism and growth ambition in this, our country. Thank you very much.